Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Good evening. This is Kesha Rogers, and I want to welcome you to our LaRouche PAC strategic overview and discussion for Monday, November 13th. And today, happy to be back. I want to welcome in discussion for tonight, Ron Kokinda. Ron is going to be joining me. We have a very important discussion concerning why we are witnessing the biggest revolt from the American people that we have seen in a very long time, as people are witnessing the destruction of their livelihood. The American people are looking at the attacks on the leading presidential candidate, the Republican contender and leader, President Donald Trump, and seeing that what we've witnessed in terms of these ongoing wars that President Trump has made very clear that he has been opposed to and knows how to get us out of these wars. What we've seen from the insane Biden, the avatar in the White House, who has been pushing a green agenda that is destroying cities across our country. We're going to be talking about that more directly today. Ron Kokinda is going to be joining me in the discussion. Ron, some of you may not know him. He is a candidate for the Michigan State House, and he's running for Michigan District 2. So what we're going to be discussing today is looking at Michigan as a case study to what we can expect if the continued Biden green agenda, the agenda of the globalists that President Trump went after aggressively during his presidency and continues to go after as he makes a bold commitment toward a future of growth and progress. What the Biden administration has represented is total war, chaos, and disaster. And if you think about Michigan as the once great arsenal of democracy, Michigan was a leader in production and manufacturing. What's happening right now, we're going to be discussing the debate, the fight that's been going on in terms of what's happening to our auto industry. Ron is going to be discussing with us what has been the ongoing debate around the collapse of production in Michigan, as well as the rise in the whole agenda for EVs, which President Trump has made clear that this policy goes against the production of real transportation and production of real energy policies, which he has continued to fight for. Now, this is important in looking at the fact that many of you might realize when President Trump was in office, he fought aggressively against the Davos agenda. And this agenda was setting forth policies such as what we've been seeing running rampant around the country of the 15-minute cities. And I know many of you have seen us talking about this in comparison to the bold vision and initiative, in contrast to the bold vision and initiative that Trump laid out in his Agenda 47. President Trump's Agenda 47 is something that every single person has to come to recognize as a leading policy initiative for turning the United States around. And part of that policy initiative of Agenda 47 has been to go after the insane policies of the opioid crisis devastating our country, the collapse in manufacturing, to go after the insane policies of the drug cartels, but also to say this is a vision we need for economic growth and development. The vision for economic growth and development is proposals that he put out calling for a quantum leap in the standard of living of the population. And when we look at, well, where can we actually define, not just in the building of new cities, new freedom cities, as President Trump called for, But where can that vision be manifested most aggressively? And it would be in Michigan. And so I'm going to actually go in a back and forth with Ron, but I want to open it up to him for him to give us a kind of blueprint of what we're witnessing right now. And then once Ron finishes his remarks, what I want to do is I want to remind people of this contrast of what President Trump has represented in his fight against the globalist agenda, his fight against the continuous war policies. Before I turn it over to Ron, I do want to emphasize to people that as we speak right now, you have the APEC summit taking place in California, in San Francisco. And we just put out a statement from LaRouche PAC, which really highlights the nature of the fight that we're in, that's being organized at this APEC summit, which is a continuation of the green agenda of the globalists. The subject is LaRouche PAC memo to APEC summit attendees. Subject: Trump's return is the very best thing for our world now. And we will go through that a little bit more later. As I said, I'm going to open it up for Ron to kind of give us a picture of what's going on there where he is. And we're going to take that and compare it to, again, President Trump's statement in his Agenda 47 for a quantum leap in the standard of living of the population, which is completely opposed to this globalist agenda of 15-minute cities, which at the center of that, we'll see that Michigan is a target of this whole operation. So let me turn it over to Ron for his comments, and then we'll go back and forth, and then we'll bring you in for questions and comments. Make sure, 1 second, Ron. Okay, let's see if we can hear you.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes, go right ahead.
Okay, so by the end of this discussion of Michigan, I hope people will get a sense of why it's going to be so crucial to bring Donald Trump back in 2024. Let me give a little bit of a context for this, just in terms of where Michigan sits at the moment. We have 13 congressional districts in the state. In 1970, we had 18 congressional districts. Michigan has lost a congressional seat every decade for the last 6 decades. In other words, the decline in industrial production, it's not keeping up with the rest of the United States. And what's happened recently in 2022, the Democrats took control of both the Michigan State House and State Senate, and they continued the control of the Michigan executive with Gretchen Whitmer. They are about to adjourn on Tuesday after the House. They lost 2 members in the House who won their local races, and the House reverted to a 54-54 tie, so they decided to leave town and adjourn. What they've done before they adjourn is to take a couple of major steps on the further destruction of Michigan industry and our population here. First, they passed these green mandates to demand that energy in Michigan be produced 50% by what they're calling clean energy by 2030, 60% by 2035, and 100% by 2040. They also passed a measure that would take local zoning control out of the hands of the localities throughout the state and put it in the hands of a state institution, specifically for wind, solar, and clean energy projects. In other words, if the localities didn't want them, the state can step in and force these things through. That, as Governor Whitmer said, is necessary because otherwise none of this stuff would move forward. So what are they talking about replacing? Well, we have a major coal-fired plant in Monroe, which is the county south of Wayne, which is where Detroit sits. It's a very big one. It's about 3.4 gigawatts of energy production. They're targeting that for closure. Now 2 years ago, they were warning about blackouts and brownouts hitting the state. This 2 years ago was a point at which they had lost, the state had lost, or the region had lost. It's a little bit bigger than Michigan per se. This Midwest region had lost 2 gigawatts of energy production from the previous year, and that's why they were warning about these blackouts and brownouts. And we had basically about 11 gigawatts at that point. The nuclear plant in Michigan, Palisades, was nearing end of life. It was built back in the 50s or late 50s, I believe. They were talking about closing that down. And along with a lot of other nuclear plants out throughout the United States. And at that point, of course, the Biden administration panicked, put out $6 billion to keep these things going because of the precarious energy situation in the United States. They had started closing fossil fuel production down in various places, the Keystone Pipeline and other places, drilling stopped. So they tried to keep these open. Well, Michigan tried to reverse course and keep this plant open. It is still closed. And at this point, even though they have a federal mandate to resume production, basically the entity that's owning the company is talking about a very small nuclear reactor remaining in operation. So it's questionable whether that will ever resume production. At the same time, we have a pipeline called Line 5 that comes in from Canada into the Upper Peninsula, and it was a pipeline that traversed through the Mackinac Strait into the Lower Peninsula. There was a ship anchor that scraped the outer coating of this thing once, and because of the great fear of an oil spill, there was a demand that this thing be shut down. Well, the previous governor in Michigan worked out a deal with the Canadian company to build a tunnel underground several hundred feet under the strait to prevent any possibility of an oil spill. Well, yet and Canada had to basically exercise a treaty obligation with the United States to arrive at this agreement. But our Attorney General is still engaged in a lawsuit to shut this down. So the company that's building this, all at their expense, is waging a legal fight to keep this entire project on track. So we're talking just from the electrical grid in the state about replacing 11 gigawatts of capacity. Now, one of our friends in the state, an engineer, did a calculation of what it would take to replace just the Monroe coal-fired plant. And he said in terms of replacing it with solar, you would need about 55 square miles of solar panels to replace that plant. So when you look at replacing the sources for our electrical grid in the state alone, you're talking about 150 to 200 square miles of this type of energy source. The line 5 supplies light crude and propane. It supplies about 50% of the propane use for the lower peninsula. It supplies almost all of the upper peninsula energy sources. And the light crude supplies all sorts of home heating and other oil production throughout the state. So you're talking about something that's quite dramatic. So they're talking about the talk in Lansing, our state capital, was that they were going to turn the Upper Peninsula into what they called the Saudi Arabia of green energy. So what you're talking about is basically windmills lining the shores of Michigan along all our Great Lakes. Whitmer has already taken some state land and turned it over to these solar companies. And of course, you know, as we've covered many times in many ways, this is incredibly inefficient compared to a number of other energy sources: nuclear, natural gas, hydro power, extremely inefficient. So basically, what we're now faced with, and of course, this question of transforming the energy base throughout Michigan is intersecting what we're facing with the steps in the green ideology in the auto industry. Trump has come here a couple of times, once in June and once last month in Clinton Township, where he addressed the auto workers directly. And he said, you know, there is no safe transition from internal combustion engines to electric vehicles. What the auto workers know is that you're losing about 40% of auto worker jobs in such a transition if this ever goes through. And you're talking about further loss of market share. Now, as late as the 1980s, the big three automakers here in Michigan had about 90% of the domestic auto market. Today, that's 40%. And during a transition to EVs, you're talking about another loss in market share because we don't have the mines, we don't have the access to the rare earth elements, and so on and so forth, to make that transition into the batteries and other things that we would need. You know, let alone unsaid is that we're not producing the power. We don't have the grid capability. These batteries are not capable of doing long distance travel. So you're talking about a situation here where we've lost a congressional seat every 10 years. And now, even though there's a short-term reprieve in terms of what the auto workers were able to win in this strike, in terms of their wages, many of these auto workers are going to be out of a job 2 years down the road or 3 years down the road. And that is something that they're quite well aware of. So this decline that has been plaguing the state for years is about to hit another major downward inflection point. The industry, when they're looking at this situation, you know, Trump was just as critical of the auto industry and the major corporations for not pushing back against this green agenda. You take Ford, for example. They are turning their headquarters and other of their facilities into running on so-called green, clean energy. They're bowing down to these mandates. But at the same time, their feet are walking out the state. The last major investment that Ford made of somewhere between 11 and 13 billion was down in Tennessee, Kentucky, close to the TVA, which has a lot of hydro, which has a lot of nuclear. And their charge for kilowatt hour of electricity down there is a little over 5 cents a kilowatt hour. Here in Michigan, it's well over 8 cents a kilowatt hour. So that was a major factor in Ford's decision. So our crazy governor here, Whitmer, is concerned that we're losing people. How does she go about populating state? Well, she's doing these advertising campaigns, urging people to come to Michigan because we have liberal abortion laws. Come here and you can manage your health care. You can manage whether you have children or not. You can have abortions. She's got a panel that's costing several $million set up to figure out why the population is declining and how we can get it to grow. Well, Trump has been very clear. You want industry, you need cheap, abundant energy. And everything that they're doing at this point is running exactly in the opposite direction. So the auto industry, when we were going to the strike lines and things like that, what Trump was saying to them was resonating because they know it's not just a fight for their incomes, it's a fight as to whether they can keep the industry at this point. It's a fight for preserving the country. And that's what this fight is, really about, and it's becoming apparent to more and more people in the state. So, Trump has said abundant, cheap energy. His campaign themes have been clear: drill, baby, drill, and to build hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of power plants. And speaking from the standpoint of Michigan, there's really no other way to do it. We cannot continue the type of industrialization, create the type of jobs that we need here if we're going to be able to support families on a single income. And that's what we want to do. I mean, when Trump talks about, good jobs being able to support a family on a single income, we're not talking about people just giving people more money. We're talking about creating the types of jobs that make it worthwhile to pay people that type of wage scale. We have to have quality jobs. And that'll come from various things that we're doing, including Trump's Strategic Defense Initiative, his revival of that program, his space program, his energy programs. That is where we want to create the type of quality jobs that we're talking about. So, Kesha, that's probably how I would situate it for the opening remarks. I would just say that, in terms of campaigning out here in Michigan, all these people tell you politics is local. And I would say, yes, in a way, but it's also strategic because, Trump is the one that will get us out of the Paris Climate Accords again. beat back this suicidal, really suicidal green agenda, and get the type of jobs where we've got a future. So it's a question, I think, of presenting that vision that for a future that's in the Agenda 47. And I think it's very clear that if you don't go in that direction, what we're about to hit in the next wave of job losses throughout the state, particularly related to the auto industry, is going to decimate the tax bases of cities, particularly in my area, downriver. It's been apparent for some time, for example, in emergency services, the fire and police, that we're reaching a point that there's parts of the day that people are going to call or put in an emergency call, and there's not going to be a response. And these communities are terribly in debt. They don't have, without this type of increase in productive jobs, they're going to be taking significant hits on their tax base, and that's going to have a very big effect. I think we're sitting on the edge of something catastrophic if this green agenda continues moving forward. So let me stop there and see.
Well, that's very good. Thank you, Ron. I'm glad you're on tonight because I think this should give people encouragement. I mean, Ron is running as a Republican to really highlight and push the Make America Great Again agenda, President Trump's Agenda 47. And obviously, we can't have that if we don't have people who understand what the alternatives are that President Trump is proposing. What are the alternatives to this insane green environmentalist agenda? But more so, the alternative to what the commitment of the Biden administration is, which is total destruction of our national sovereignty. And so I think it's important. A couple of the things that you brought up, Ron, from the standpoint of looking at this green agenda in transportation and energy, and how it's not only affecting, I think it's important for people to know that this policy is affecting every single city across the nation. And the way it's doing so is from the standpoint of, you look at the collapse in physical production. And I know I wanted to actually play for people again to look at for a second here what President Trump's bold vision looked like in his Agenda 47, and why, at the beginning, I talked about his call for a quantum leap in the standard of living. And you highlighted a lot of that from the standpoint of, you're speaking of how we're going to actually have high paying single family incomes, or should we say, to increase the lower the cost of homes for single families, and increase the standard of living within the population. So I wanted to just play this quickly for people, and I want to get further comments from you. 1 second here.
Past generations of Americans pursued big dreams and daring projects that once seemed absolutely impossible. They pushed across an unsettled continent and built new cities in the wild frontier. They transformed American life with the interstate highway system, magnificent it was. And they launched a vast network of satellites into orbit all around the Earth. But today, our country has lost its boldness. Under my leadership, we will get it back in a very big way. If you look at just 3 years ago, what we were doing was unthinkable. How good it was, how great it was for our country. Our objective will be a quantum leap in the American standard of living. That's what will happen. Here are just a few of the ways we can do it. Almost 1/3 of the landmass of the United States is owned by the federal government, with just a very, very small portion of that land, just a fraction, 1/2 of 1%. Would you believe that? We should hold a contest to charter up to 10 new cities and award them to the best proposals for development. In other words, we'll actually build new cities in our country again. These freedom cities will reopen the frontier, reignite American imagination, and give hundreds of thousands of young people and other people, all hardworking families, a new shot at home ownership and, in fact, the American dream. Another big opportunity is in transportation. Dozens of major companies in the United States and China are racing to develop vertical takeoff and landing vehicles for families and individuals. Just as the United States led the automotive revolution in the last century, I want to ensure that America, not China, leads this revolution in air mobility. These breakthroughs can transform commerce, bring a giant infusion of wealth into rural America, and connect families in our country in new ways. Likewise, through our Strategic National Manufacturing Initiative, which is going to be very big and very, very successful, we will turn forgotten communities into hives of industry, producing the goods we will no longer import from China. We will also have a major initiative on lowering the cost of living with a special focus on lowering the cost of a new car and lowering the cost to build a single-family home. And they will be beautiful homes. And I will ask Congress to support baby bonuses for young parents to help launch a new baby boom. Finally, I'll challenge the governors of all 50 states to join me in a great modernization and beautification campaign, getting rid of ugly buildings, refurbishing our parks and our public spaces, making cities and towns more livable, ensuring a pristine environment, and building towering monuments to our true American heroes. Very importantly, I will also make sure all of these new places are safe. We love and cherish our police. They will do the job the way they have to. It is time to start talking about greatness for our country again. I will dramatically increase living standards and build a future that brings our country together through excitement, opportunity, and success. Thank you very much.
But I will just kind of reiterate what he stressed in that video, which I can put in the chat for people to listen to later, calling for the building of 10 new freedom cities, as he called it, for a contest of development, contests for proposals for development of these freedom cities for landmass that is owned by the federal government. And so he was talking about 1/3 of the landmass is owned by the federal government, and how we would take a small percentage of this and start the process of development of new cities. But the development of these new cities would require what he calls for a revolution in transportation. He calls for lowering the cost of a single-family home, increases in manufacturing initiatives, productive jobs, manufacturing, and for the development of a baby boom amongst the younger people. So when you were speaking, you talked about the fact in terms of, as President Trump said, how would you see the manifestation of a revolution in transportation coming directly from Michigan, for example? Obviously, a revolution in transportation is not going to be, it's not at all going to be EV cars. But what would this revolution in transportation and retooling our auto industry look like? Is that something that you've thought about in that context of President Trump's Agenda 47 initiative?
Well, he's talking. He mentioned some futuristic things in terms of
right, like flying cars.
Flying cars. That's been kicking around for a little while. Yeah, I think that would give the Federal Aviation Administration quite a headache, but it's something interesting to play around with. No, I think I think that I think there are several reasons why he's come back to revisit a renewal of Ronald Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative in terms of a missile shield for the United States. I think it's apparent to people, given what's going on in Ukraine and the clearly demonstrated fact that all of our so-called advanced technology isn't something that we have alone, and the technology does not stand up to what you can fight a war the way a war has been fought over there. I think it's also become apparent in terms of what some people call the mini NATO of Israel and the Middle East. Question of U.S. deterrence is out the window, and the United States is in a very vulnerable position internationally until we can get Trump back in here and get this economy moving. We're in a very vulnerable position economically. We're in a very vulnerable position militarily and strategically. Not that I think that we face imminent threats to the homeland, but we do have to get our act together. And we had a Agenda 47 call the other night, and there was a lot of young people on it. It was dominated by young people, 20, 22 years old. And, the thing that young people, that age, it's people our age and my age that remember, the Apollo program was made a great revival of the United States. This was a program where every dollar we put in, we return 10 in terms of the technological advances that it gave the country. I think, the people who tried to do studies of that basically stopped counting at about 20,000 new technologies that were spun off from that program. Between Trump's revival of that SDI program and his Artemis program, the Moon Mars program, that has still been ongoing, slowed some, but ongoing, for various reasons, including the fact that, other countries are going great guns in the space program, and we're on the edge of losing our edge in terms of leading in space. I think he recognizes that very clearly. And I think the type of technological effort that will come off of that will generate a lot of new advances, not necessarily all that's going to play into the auto industry directly in terms of our transportation modes, but the capability that Michigan has in terms of what's centered around the auto industry, and less obvious, but also there, the role that Michigan played in the space program. A lot of ancillary and feeder industries, supply chain industries. There's a lot. There's a lot, for example, in just the Space Launch System There was like 84, 85 companies here in Michigan that were all input into that program, which was the big launch vehicle for the Artemis mission. Back during the Apollo program, most of all the paneling control systems were done by Ford Motor Company, which, you know, all of this was less obvious, less out of the public eye, but Michigan played a role in it. There was a political effort here that was ongoing. It kind of got sidetracked when the Democrats took control of the state houses here. But to get a lot of the aerospace industries, more of aerospace industries into the thumb of Michigan. We have two space launch facilities now in the state. One is for polar launch, satellite launch of satellites, and one is for I guess you would call it horizontal launch, things they would launch off of, for example, plane takeoffs, things like that. And there will be a command center built for these two systems. There was one of the cities north of Detroit. This is big three counties: Macomb, Oakland, and Wayne. Those are the three big counties in southeast Michigan. Macomb was the home to the Reagan Democrats, which played a crucial role in Trump's election, winning Michigan in 2016. Well, one of the cities in that area, Macomb County, Sterling Heights, actually went through the exercise of making a bid to bring the Space Force headquarters here to Michigan. It didn't get here, but the fact they went through that exercise and made an effort for it was something. People were thinking about that. There was also discussion for a testing facility to develop here in the state that could go to test devices in the area of Mach 30. I don't know if there's classified testing facilities that are greater than Mach 10, but I think that's about what it is here in the United States now that I'm aware of. And, you know, we're in a situation where the Russians and China is working on things. Russians have them, you know, hypersonic missiles. You know, we're behind in these types of areas. That would certainly be part of this type of aerospace and engineering effort. So this area has a lot of capabilities that would feed into all sorts of components for these types of areas to bring, you know, to develop these types of good paying jobs. And this is absolutely what is needed to increase productivity. People don't realize, but this whole green agenda to bring electric vehicles to replace the internal combustion engine, there's no technological advances in this. This is spending billions and hundreds of billions of dollars for a sideways technology. There is no grapes and leaps in productivity that's going to come from this process. This is all to fulfill this ideological objective of getting rid of fossil fuels and cutting down on carbon. From a scientific standpoint, it's the most insane thing that you could do for the economy. It's the most insane thing you could do for the environment. I bring this up as something that we have to do a lot more work on, but just to throw out, you know, so people have an idea of this. And this is something that Patrick Moore, who was one of the founders of Greenpeace and broke with them for various reasons, has talked about extensively. You know, the question of carbon in the atmosphere. You know, plant life stops when the carbon in the atmosphere drops to like 150 parts per million. plants get sick if carbon is there at 180 parts per million. During the last ice age, he estimates that, a colder environment, the ice, the oceans absorb more carbon when it's colder. That the carbon in the atmosphere dropped to as low as 280 parts per million during the ice age. So when you look at it from the standpoint of an estimated 10,000 parts per million when life began, and now, because man has been putting carbon out into the atmosphere, we're maybe a little over 400 parts per million. You can see that, plants have been trying to modify themselves, what they call the carbon 3 to carbon 4 plants, where they can do better with less carbon. I mean, it's an evolutionary struggle for plants to make do with this drop in carbon there. So that's why I say it's something that very bad for the economy, very bad for the environment, and yet they're going great guns ahead with this program. If to do this type of thing, you make this change over by 2040 to change all these fuel sources over there. There's no change in productivity. In fact, it's probably going to be worse. So that's why, what Trump is proposing as a vision of the future, Michigan could play a great role in, but that's what we've got to get the opportunity to do.
Absolutely.